What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So I'm making this video because there's something going on in the UFC at the moment that's really pissing me off. And that is this refusal to give Evloev a title shot against Alexander Volkanovski. So let me unpack why this bothers me, because it's not primarily the fact that Evloev is the deserving #1 contender, which he is. He's on a 9-fight win streak. Like, he's beaten countless other ranked featherweights. Like, he should be the guy. He's undefeated. He's one of the rare, like, proper wrestlers at featherweight. And he beat the other one in Aljamain Sterling. But the problem is that this win, like if Volk beats Evloev, that could do so much more for his legacy than people are realizing. So if you've seen my last couple of videos, they've had to do with, it's been the GOAT list video, and it was another video about how Volkanovski's resume, Volkanovski's legacy, Volkanovski's ranking in the all-time GOAT list has been negatively affected by Poirier versus Holloway 3 in a way that makes me reconsider his #2 placement, makes me reconsider, how much better he is than Khabib. Now, with that said, if Volk can beat Evloev, if Volk can beat Evloev as a 35 or 36-year-old man, I think there's a very real argument that Volk not only maintains his #2 spot, I think he might be the best ever. He might be the #1 GOAT of MMA if he beats Evloev. Now, some people might think that's, hyperbole. They might think that's like a recency bias sort of thing. That's the sort of take someone would have immediately after the fight, and then would age poorly, the next time Volk fights and loses, or the next time some other great fighter wins. But, let me unpack why the Evloev fight specifically matters so much, why it matters so much more than if he were to beat Arnold Allen, or if he were to beat Yair Rodriguez in the rematch, or any other contender. It's specifically Evloev that, if Volk can win, may very well elevate him to the greatest fighter of all time. And it has to do with the variety of styles a person beats. So, if you saw my GOAT list video, I did take a knock against Max Holloway because he's never really fought wrestlers. Like, he fought Frankie Edgar when he was past it, and that was mostly just a striking match. He fought, Ricardo Lamas, who, has a wrestling background of sorts, but isn't, anything to write home about. Like, he's really never fought wrestlers. He's fought almost exclusively strikers, and then Ortega has a jiu-jitsu, is a jiu-jitsu specialist, of course, but even there, Max mostly just struck with Ortega. So, to me, that hurts your resume. Like, you need to fight a diverse skill set of opponents, and you also, given the if you had to pick one of the main three, striking, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, wrestling is the biggest pain in the ass to deal with. It is, in many ways, it cycles back and forth. Some fighters excel because they're all-rounders, some fighters excel because they're specialists, some fighters excel because they're combinations of, maybe they're a great submission threat and a great wrestler, maybe they're a great wrestler and a great striker. Sean Brady would be an example of the former, TJ Dillashaw would be an example of the latter. There's different ways to become an elite fighter, but if you had to look at the different specialties and pick one that's been the most successful, you'd probably have to say wrestling. And so to have never faced a proper wrestler, a proper smothering wrestler who's gonna, do what John Fitch did to people all the way back in the day, if you've never had to deal with that, that hurts your resume a little bit. And for Volk, he's an interesting one because I'd say he's fought more diverse opponents than Holloway, even though Holloway's fought most of the same people. And the reasons for that are multiple. One, Volk fought Chad Mendes on the come-up, and Mendes did use his wrestling in that fight. Volk fought Islam and nearly won the first fight, and did quite well surviving and staying off and escaping the grappling. And Volk just clearly has better grappling than Max. He took Max down in their fights. Volk uses his offensive grappling, his takedowns, his ground and pound. He uses that in his fights in a way that Max doesn't. Volk is sort of that archetype where he is an elite striker and a great wrestler. He is in that TJ Dillashaw, that, Dominic Cruz sort of archetype, sort of like what Henry Cejudo was turning into as his career matured. That's kind of Volk's archetype. Now, Volk also has the advantage of his fight with Ortega. Now, Max fought Ortega, but when Max fought Ortega, very little grappling happened. Ortega got 2 takedowns and had about 2 minutes of control time. There was no submission attempts from Ortega. And sure, some of that is, should be credited to Max. Max, was able to keep himself from getting into bad positions. But it didn't demonstrate in the same way that Volk's fight with Ortega did that Max could deal with Ortega's submission threat. So consider this, consider other great jiu-jitsu fighters in the relatively recent, UFC. Consider a guy like Damian Maia. Damian Maia was an actual jiu-jitsu threat who you had to worry about using his jiu-jitsu to submit you. A lot of jiu-jitsu guys end up not really using their jiu-jitsu offensively so much as defensively. There's a lot of jiu-jitsu guys turned strikers, especially at the elite level. So the 2 best examples of this, I think, are Jacare Souza and Gilbert Burns. So those were elite athletes, elite, highly accomplished competition jiu-jitsu guys. And yeah, in MMA they could submit you. They had, but they would typically only submit kind of mid-level competition. They weren't submitting elite-level competition. And they weren't really much of a jiu-jitsu threat unless they were just or they weren't much of a submission threat unless they were just crushing you on the ground. They needed that positional dominance typically, where they were just having their way with you, and then they could submit you. So, and yeah, Jacare Souza would still threaten with it, like Robert Whittaker, when he beat Jacare Souza, still had to defend having Jacare on his back, and Jacare was still able to get Yoel Romero down in the 3rd round and control him after he was tired. But honestly, it almost works better defensively. So while a lot of people will point to examples of wrestlers just crushing jiu-jitsu guys or even submitting jiu-jitsu guys, it needs to be pointed out, and I saw MMA Che point this out in one of his videos, but it's often not apples to apples, because there's a difference between some fighter who happens to be a black belt in jiu-jitsu, which pretty much just means he's been doing jiu-jitsu while he's been training MMA, in the sense that if the guy is 12 years into training MMA and he's been training jiu-jitsu alongside Muay Thai and wrestling and everything else, he's probably going to get a black belt eventually just by putting his time in. And there's just a difference between that guy with a black belt and the kinds of wrestlers who exceed at the highest level. So often those are, either really experienced guys from Russia and the Caucasus regions, or they're people from America who are D1 champions and people like that. And there's just a difference in capability and athleticism between a D1 wrestler and some random ass Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. A more fair comparison would be a Jiu-Jitsu guy who won the Pan Am Games, or who won ADCC, or won the IBJJF championships or something. That's the level of Jiu-Jitsu guy that should be compared to a wrestler like Kamaru Usman, or a wrestler like Khamzat Chimaev, or something like that. And when you compare those things, the jiu-jitsu guys actually do okay. Look at Gilbert Burns versus Khamzat Chimaev. Khamzat got him down, but he couldn't get anything going, and Gilbert Burns was threatening enough from the bottom, both with that armbar attempt. I think it's the 2nd round where Chimaev is in his guard, and Burns just puts his foot on his chest and boots him off of him. Khamzat ended up allowing it to just be a striking match, something he's done with literally no other opponent, including Kamaru Usman, because he didn't like kind of the feeling he was getting on the ground with Gilbert Burns. Similarly, look at Jacare Souza versus not just Romero, but even better, I think, look at the Weidman fight. He was able to keep Weidman's offensive grappling, basically shut down. And yeah, he wasn't able to impose his on Weidman. It's not like he was taking Weidman down and getting his back and submitting him, but he did have a lot of success defensively, and then knocked him out in the 3rd round. So honestly, that's a lot of the jiu-jitsu people, is they're more the jiu-jitsu is almost helping them defensively. And that's where I criticized Islam Makhachev's win over Davi Ramos, who, mentioned MMA Che. Like, Che looks at that win as this great example of, oh, he beat this great jiu-jitsu guy. Khabib never beat a great jiu-jitsu guy. And it's like, yeah, nothing happened. Like, that fight was all on the feet until the third round. Islam couldn't take Davi Ramos down, and then he drops him with a knee, gets on top and lands ground and pound to a decision. Like, what does that show? What does that show about Islam's ability to deal with jiu-jitsu? Nothing. It shows nothing. Now, I mentioned Damian Maia. Damian Maia is an actual submission threat. You actually have to worry about him, even if you're an elite fighter, you have to worry about him using his jiu-jitsu to submit you. And we've seen people shut that down. Now, how you shut that down is more or less impressive in different contexts. Like, Tyron Woodley shutting that down by just stuffing every single takedown is impressive in its own right and is a good win, but it doesn't show that he knows how to deal with the jiu-jitsu, that he can actually deal with the threats on the ground, that he can deal with having Damian Maia on his back. Whereas Jake Shields' win over Damian Maia, a split decision win, controversial, but a very close fight, they were grappling the whole time. It was similar to the Damian Maia Ben Askren fight, except where Ben Askren ultimately succumbed and like got submitted by Maia by deciding to grapple with him. Shields got the better and won the decision. Similarly, like, look at Fedor. Like, Fedor has for a heavyweight especially, has a pretty good diversity of skill sets he had to deal with, and Nogueira and Cro Cop were like polar ends of the spectrum in terms of types of opponent he had to deal with. And it would be less impressive that he beat those guys if he had just taken down Cro Cop the whole time, or if he had just stood with Nogueira the whole time. Like, people applauded him for striking with Cro Cop and being willing to go into Nogueira's guard. And sure, that's still top position, but like, Fedor spent 20 minutes, especially in the first fight, but 20 minutes apiece in both their fights, like, spending a huge amount of time just sitting in Nogueira's guard, breaking grips, fending off triangle attempts, fending off armbar attempts, and just pounding the shit out of him. And even surviving, like Nogueira would get a sweep here and there and get on top and try to pat, there's like, I just rewatched the fight the other day, he sweeps, gets a half guard, starts passing half guard, Fedor escapes, gets back on top. Like, Fedor had to show that he knew how to deal with the jiu-jitsu. And like, Woodley's win over Maia doesn't show that. And Islam's win over Davi Ramos doesn't show that. Now, circling back, Volkanovski beats Ortega. Max beat Ortega, barely had to deal with the jiu-jitsu. Volk fights Ortega, has to get out of 3 submission attempts from, I think there's the guillotine, the triangle, and the anaconda. The triangle and the guillotine are especially tight. The guillotine, like, when I watched that live, I thought it was over. I was like, oh no, shit, Volk's gonna lose. And Volk demonstrated that he could escape multiple different submission attempts from Ortega, and not only that, but continue to hang out on top of him and pound the shit out of him and win the fight very clearly. Like, that shows that the jiu-jitsu is not going to defeat him. Like, that shows, like I'll compare it to Fedor. Fedor also fought some wrestlers. He fought Coleman, he fought Randleman, and he beat those guys, he submitted those guys, but those fights showed a weakness to wrestling. Like, Fedor got double-legged by Randleman, he got double-legged by Coleman, got slammed by Randleman. Like, you could watch those fights and say, yeah, Fedor won, but I think a great wrestler could beat him. I think he does have a susceptibility to wrestlers. If someone like Cain Velasquez fought Fedor, you might bet on Cain because of the wrestling. Now, if you were to watch Volk fight Ortega and see Volk get out of those submissions, you're not going to come with, your takeaway is not going to be, aha, Volk has a weakness to jiu-jitsu. We just need a better jiu-jitsu guy to go in there and take out Volk. You'd have the opposite effect. You'd say no one has a prayer at submitting this guy. And I said that, to like my friends going into the Islam fight, because I heard people saying, oh, geez, like, look at Volk in this mounted guillotine against Ortega. Like, what if he's in that situation with Islam, he's probably going to get submitted. And I'm like, he's not going to be. Like, Volk got in that guillotine because, if I remember right, he throws a kick, I think it's a low kick. Ortega like catches it, throws a right hand, and kind of like pushes Volk over with the punch. He catches him off balance, and he just teleports into this mounted guillotine with this just he just leaps on it, and he gets this really nice bite on the choke. And it's like, no one else is going to do that. No one else is going to put Volk in that situation. No one else is going to replicate that moment. You know, you've got other things to worry about when you fight Islam that you don't have to worry about when you fight Ortega, but that ain't one of them. And so Volk showed that he could be a legitimate submission threat, because again, some huge amount of jiu-jitsu guys aren't even really submission threats at the high level. You know, guys like Jacare, guys like Gilbert Burns. Some guys are, like Damian Maia, like Ortega. Brian Hall is like that. Like Ryan Hall, for as much as he, you know, is like a weird experiment who retired as soon as he lost, he was a legit threat. Like if you were on top of him, there was a real risk he was going to submit you, or at least put you in threatening holds. And that's why it's impressive that Topuria beat him the way that he did. It's impressive that Topuria, you know, kind of figured out like, okay, here's how he's entering, and he finally found a way to allow him to enter and kind of get on top and get enough control that he could pound him out. That's more impressive than if you beat Hall by just, you know, imagine beating Hall by just avoiding all of his leg entanglements. Every time he Eminari rolled, every time he dropped for a leg, you just, you know, leapt away, you just limp-legged out of it, pulled away, and then most of the fight was on the feet, and you won by decision because every time, you know, you just blocked it every time he went for like his side kicks and hook kicks and stuff, and then you landed some more strikes and you won by decision. You know, or even if you just knocked him out. Like what if you Ben Askren, Ryan Hall? Like what if he comes out and he goes for a rollover right away and you like soccer kick him in the head or flying knee him in the head as he's rolling and you knock him out in 10 seconds. That's a cool win and everything, but that doesn't show that you can handle the jiu-jitsu threat. Topuria showed that he can handle the jiu-jitsu threat. And that's just way more impressive. And Volk showed that he can handle the jiu-jitsu threat against Ortega, and that's much more impressive. You know, it's like Michael Chandler. I mentioned this fight in my previous video, but Chandler's first fight with Oliveira, you know, is a good look for Chandler up until the knockout. Like the fact that he survived with Oliveira on his back, he fends off any choke attempts, he escapes, he gets on top, he's landing ground and pound, he drops him. Like he showed that he was prepared for the jiu-jitsu. And Oliveira, like Maia, like Ortega, like Hall, is an actual submission threat. He's not just a jiu-jitsu guy who kind of barely uses it, maybe gets a takedown and some control time here and there, maybe gets on your back once in a while, maybe uses it to fend off wrestlers, but isn't actually a submission threat. Oliveira is an actual submission threat, and Chandler handled it very well. So that's the jiu-jitsu side for Volk. Volk has also beaten great strikers. He beat Jose Aldo. He beat Max Holloway 3 times. He beat Yair Rodriguez. These are very capable, very elite strikers with very different styles. 2 of those guys are all-time great fighters. He beat one of them 3 times. Like, that's covered. Like, he's beaten all the strikers you could ever want a guy to beat. What's left? The wrestling. Because he fought Mendes, but Mendes was, 1, aging out, 2, Mendes is more of a wrestle boxer at that point. Like, he's going to use his takedowns to maybe help, you know, maybe help set up his strikes, maybe help, you know, secure a round with a little bit of control time or something. But he's not that wrestle first, smothering, no escape sort of wrestler that like a Khabib is, or like a Khamzat is, you know. So that means less to me. Volk gets credit for how well he did against Islam, but he did lose that fight. And I know it was close, but he did lose. So, you know, that you can't just chalk that up as like, oh, he proved he can just like defeat an elite, that he can actually defeat an elite wrestler of that archetype. He showed that he can put up a very good fight against that, but he didn't actually win. And so, you know, we can only give him so much of a consolation prize for that. And this is where Evloev comes in. If Volk can beat Evloev, which I think is very realistic, because Volk, you know, as far as I can tell, he's still healthy enough that he can come in with great cardio, that he can have a proper 5-round camp. Evloev is not dangerous as a finisher. All of his UFC fights are decision wins, so he's not a dangerous submission threat. He's not a dangerous knockout artist. Like, the kind of people I'm worried about Volk fighting are like Gene Silva, where it's like, okay, Volk, you're getting old. You've been dropped and knocked out recently in your last several fights. like, you're getting older, so your reflexes aren't going to be the same. Your durability probably won't be the same. Like, some, like, young knockout artist with insane precision and timing who's just full of piss and vinegar is the kind of guy you're afraid he's going to lose to. Evloev seems very winnable. And it's like the sort of fight where you just can't imagine Volk not having to deal with the wrestling. Like, Volk isn't just going to come out and knock him out in a minute. Like, it's going to take time for Volk to either get a TKO or win a decision. And you just can't imagine him not having to defend takedowns and probably, you know, survive on the bottom, probably escape from the bottom, get back up. Like, he's going to have to prove that he can engage the wrestler and still come out and win the fight. And based on how well he did against Islam, and based on his toughness, based on his cardio, I think that's still doable, even at this age. And if he can do that, if he can beat Evloev, then look at what he'll have done. He'll have beaten Evloev, like the wrestler, young, undefeated. Evloev's only 31. You know, 9-fight winning streak. Like, that's like an Usman versus Woodley winning streak for a contender to have. He'll have beaten him. You know, he'll have had the good first fight with Islam. You know, beaten Mendez. So, like, that's the wrestler front just absolutely covered. He'll have beaten Ortega, not just beaten him, but survived those submission holds and then pounded the shit out of him. It's like what Fedor did to Nogueira, but more impressive in some ways. And what Fedor failed to do against Fabricio Verdum. And he'll have beaten strikers like Aldo, like Holloway 3 times, like Yair Rodriguez. Like, that is a level of variety of opponent, and each of them, like, you know, all-time greats in the striking department. Dangerous, not the best, but very dangerous, you know, kind of perpetual contender like Yair Rodriguez. Same thing for finger hurts. Same thing for Ortega. Dangerous submission guy, dangerous, perpetual contender, fought Evloev, like maybe the most deserving #1 contender that division has had in years. Like, if he can do all that, and if he can do that at age 35, 36, after losing to Islam, after losing to Poirier, like, to me, that might eclipse, Merab Dvalishvili. Like, if you saw my GOATless video, I was saying how insane it is that Merab beat O'Malley twice, Jan, and Umar, because that diversity of opponent and skill set to have to deal with and to be able to do the same shit to all 3 of them is absolutely insane, and that by itself, like, made me put Merab quite high on my list. I didn't give a shit that he beat Aldo when he was past his prime, that he beat Cejudo when he was past his prime, that he beat Moraes and Dodson and guys like that when they were past their prime. I care that he beat Jan, Umar, and O'Malley twice. You know, the other ones are still good, but those wins aren't why he's like #6 on my list. It's those wins against the young guys with the different styles. And honestly, if Volk can beat, Yair, Max, Aldo, Ortega, and Evloev, all in their domains, beating the strikers with striking, surviving the submission attempts of Ortega, and then ground and pounding the hell out of him, and then fending off the wrestling and escaping the wrestling and beating the shit out of Evloev, if Volk can do that, with the longevity, with the age, like, he might be the GOAT, because that's just a level of diversity and competition, and combined with quality of competition, combined with longevity, combined with never losing in his prime, especially in his own weight class. Like, he might just be the GOAT. And this is the time. Like, we need to strike while the iron is hot. Evloev hasn't fucking lost yet, and Volk is still fighting. Like, and he's still the champ. He's the champ right now because Poirier is not here. So, like, we're just not, like, we have this chance to get true greatness, to get lightning in a bottle, and the UFC wants to fuck around and give it to Yair Rodriguez, who everyone fucking hates, and give Pico this totally unearned match against Evloev and fuck him over. And yeah, I get it. Evloev is, people think he's boring. It's all by decision. They don't want him to be champion. Like, they don't want him to beat Volk and then beat Gene Silva and whatever. But this is such a moment. This is such a chance for greatness, and it's like genuinely doable. Like, I might pick Volk to beat Evloev. It's a tough fight to pick, but like, Evloev's very good, and Volk is old, and Evloev's big, and all that kind of stuff. But it's very winnable for Volk, and this is the sort of thing that can make him the best fighter of all time, and they're not going to fucking give it to him.